After this, he went wandering and practicing the way in an area that is mountainous and covered with thick forests, called Motong Jungle, which is in the districts of Bungan and Ponpisai. In this area there are many places which are good and suitable for practicing the way, and there were some newly established villages made up of only a few houses. The people there invited him to spend the Vassa in that place for their benefit, and as it was a place which suited his temperament, he agreed to stay there for that Vassa period. While he was staying and practicing Dhamma in the hills of the Ponpisai district, he said that he was fascinated and glad at heart to see all the different kinds of animals there, and he had much metta for them. The animals he saw included wild fowl, pheasant, all sorts of birds like hornbill and peacock, as well as animals like the palm civet, barking deer, wild boar, ordinary deer, monkeys of various kinds, gibbons, wild dogs, tigers, leopards, elephants, wild oxen, and red bulls, each of which were far more prolific than elsewhere. They wandered about in packs by day and night, and he could hear their cries echoing loudly through the forest, each group coming regularly at the same time every day. Some days when he went out walking for Paṭipadā, he would see a large tiger walking most gracefully in the forest ahead of him. It was quite close to him, walking fearlessly, proud and dignified, which is its nature. He said that when it was walking in the forest ahead of him where there was a clearing, it was beautiful to see the way it walked. The first time he saw the tiger, it glanced at him just momentarily and went on walking without looking back at him again, as though it was not in the least afraid of him. But inwardly it was probably careful and watchful, which is in character for an animal that has good mindfulness and is inherently cautious, and that does not easily let go and become fascinated with anything. As for the Acharya, he had no thought of fear for the tiger, because he had seen them before on many occasions, and he had heard them growling and roaring so often while staying in the forests in all sorts of places where it was quite normal for such animals to live all the time, so he was quite accustomed to them and had no fear of them. One evening he was sitting and teaching the way of Gammartana to the bhikkhus who were staying with him, who were about 3 or 4 in all. He said that they heard 3 large, playful, and reckless tigers roaring, each one in a different direction. After that, they heard them growling threateningly at each other with some fighting, and then they went completely quiet. After a while, they heard them growling and fighting close by. At first, they heard them playing and fighting beyond the area where the bhikkhus were staying, and then when they became quiet, it seemed as if they had gone elsewhere. But wherever the tigers may have gone when they were quiet, at about 9 p.m., they mutually decided to move in under the floor of the small meeting hall, the sala, where the bhikkhus were sitting in samadhi listening to the Dhamma teaching. The floor of the sala was just over 1 meter above the ground, and the sound of these tigers roaring and growling and fighting together was such that the Acharya had to shout at them, saying, "Hey, my 3 friends, don't make such a noise. The bhikkhus are listening to a talk on Dhamma. This is bad and evil, and you could end up in hell. Don't say I didn't tell you, for this is not the place for being boisterously noisy, and you should all go away and roar and growl elsewhere. This is a monastery for bhikkhus who like to develop calm, unlike yourselves. So go and roar somewhere else to your heart's content, where nobody will come to disturb you. In this place, the bhikkhus practice the way of Dhamma, and they do not give you permission to make a lot of noise and disturbance." As soon as they heard Venerable Ajaan Khao shouting at them, they went quiet and still for a short while, but then they could still hear them, as if they were whispering to each other quietly under the sala, saying, "We better not make much noise. The bhikkhus are annoyed and shouting at us, so we must talk quietly, or it will be bad and evil, and we may soon end up with swords on our heads." But after a while, they again started growling and playfully fighting each other, and they did not seem to want to go elsewhere, as Venerable Ajaan had told them, and they mutually decided that under the floor of the sala was the place for them to play and have fun from dusk until midnight, when they all went away. Meanwhile, the bhikkhus remained sitting there doing their samadhi practice, after Venerable Ajaan had finished his teaching, while the 3 large tigers were playing and fighting and growling and making a lot of noise under the sala until they went into the forest at midnight. After which, the bhikkhus left and went, each one to the place where he was staying. This incident was most strange and unusual, for, as Venerable Ajaan Khao said, he had been wandering about in the way of Gamartana in the forests in all sorts of places and different districts for many years, and he had never before known or heard of tigers coming so close in a friendly manner, as if they had been close friends of the bhikkhus for a long time. Normally, tigers are afraid of people by instinct, even though they are so powerful that they make people more afraid of them than almost any other animal. But generally, tigers are more afraid of people than people are afraid of tigers, and they avoid and keep away from people. Yet these 3 tigers seemed to be not only not afraid of people, but they even went to the extent of taking possession of the space under the floor of the small sala to play and have fun together, while a lot of bhikkhus were gathered right above them. It seems that they were not in the least afraid of the bhikkhus who were people, much the same as other people everywhere. This was quite remarkable, for such animals know nothing of Sīla, Dhamma, morality, which all people know about. Yet their behavior in coming into close proximity to the bhikkhus made it look almost as if these tigers had a good understanding of Sīla, Dhamma, which they put into practice in the way that people do. They never once displayed any menacing behavior towards the bhikkhus, although they probably did so towards each other in the knowledge that they all understood what their intentions were. While listening to Venerable Ajaan Khao telling me about this incident, I felt as if my hair was standing on end with fear, even though it took place a long time ago, which was silly. Foolish, silly people are like this. For even if the acharyas tell them stories of all sorts of things that have happened, which have a moral of Dhamma buried in them, foolish and incompetent people are not likely to listen for the purpose of extracting the moral teaching from it. Instead, they stick just to the thread of the story itself, which shows their lack of skill. Like the writer who showed fear shamelessly in front of Venerable Ajaan Khao while listening to his story. But in addition, the writer is also displaying his timidity in this book for those who read to laugh at him, which is bad enough. But having read this, please be careful, and don't let this kind of story penetrate into your heart to haunt it, or many of you are likely to become timid and silly people also. Venerable Ajaan Khao said how most of the bhikkhus who listened to his teaching on that night and sat doing samadhi bhavana were stirred up and frightened both at that time and after they left the sala also. Their eyes and ears were wide open when they heard the 3 great teachers coming to give them training and to help Venerable Ajaan by staying under the sala. For their normal characteristic behavior mixed with playfulness made the bhikkhus who were sitting in bhavana frightened and rigid. They did not dare to let their chittas wander out and away freely, for fear that these 3 teachers would decide to jump up and give them instructions on the floor of the sala in various ways. But it was most praiseworthy and good of these 3 animals that they did nothing that was excessive or violent or beyond what was reasonable, such as getting onto the floor of the sala. They knew what their basic situation in life was, and to some extent what that of the bhikkhus was, and they did not go beyond what was proper for them in their situation, for their activities were all gentle and harmonious. Then they left and went away. After that, they never came back again, although the district where the bhikkhus were staying was a place where tigers and all sorts of other animals wandered about. There was never a night without some tigers wandering about the area, because it was a most suitable environment for all sorts of forest animals to stay in. For it was all hills and jungles and very extensive, so that if someone were to walk right through it, it would take him several days. There were all sorts of animals there, as we explained above, but there were large numbers of each type. There were many herds of elephants and packs of wild boars, and each group was composed of many animals, and they were not much afraid of people. The year that Venerable Ajaan Khao stayed in the Paṭipadā district, all sorts of skillful ways and methods arose in him, and he often had to warn and remind the other bhikkhus who were with him not to be careless in maintaining the Tūtanga observances, for they were living in the middle of many things which made it necessary for them to be careful, by depending on the Tūtanga observances as their lifeline, with the Dhamma and Vinaya as that to which they fully entrusted themselves in both life and death. In this way they could live happily without being scared and apprehensive of all sorts of things which might otherwise make them jump with fright. They ate very little, just enough to act as a medicine which supported their bodies and minds, thātu kantha, and kept them going from day to day. For there were few faithful lay supporters, the village having been recently formed with only a few houses, and it had still not become firmly established. But it was the intention of these bhikkhus, who had pledged themselves in Dhamma, to train themselves to put up with difficulties for the sake of the Dhamma of living inwardly in a state of peace. So they were not much concerned about their living conditions, nor whether they got a lot of food and Paṭipadā, for such things would otherwise become an obstacle in the way of what they were trying to do. As for medicines and remedies for sickness, they had confidence in putting up with the pain and fighting the sickness by striving hard in samadhi pāvana. They also thought of their friends, the animals who lived in the forest about them, and took them as an example, for they never had any medicines available to them, nor were they born in a hospital with doctors and midwives to aid them, yet here they were, animals of all sorts, quite able to keep their family lines going, and in large numbers too. And they never show any grief or disheartenment at their lack of medical attention from doctors, nurses, and all sorts of medicines and medical devices and machines. Whereas the bhikkhus are of human birth, and are sons of the Sakya, the lineage of the Buddha, the great teacher whose name resounds throughout the triple universe, and who learnt everything in the books of the 3 levels of existence by means of endurance, khanti, effort, virya, wisdom, skill, and ability in all ways. Never was he caught at a loss, unable to find a way out, nor was he ever weak and lazy and inclined to give up. But if we bhikkhus retreat, shedding tears just because of the suffering and hardships of the aches and pains as in fever of sickness, which is a natural condition for these khandhas, we are bound to lose out and go bankrupt, and we will not be able to guide ourselves or the religion properly. For unless we are courageous and firm, putting up with conditions, sabhava, as we find them, having, living, and experiencing them all with mindfulness and wisdom to assess and know each and every event which comes into association with us, there is no way to save oneself and escape to a lasting and safe haven. When the citta has been trained in the right way, it will find joy in Dhamma, gladly guiding oneself into the methods of the path and fruition without changing course or creating obstacles to cause more trouble to oneself. The practice of the way will then steadily progress without slipping backwards and feeling disheartened that one has no refuge either outwardly or inwardly, for one will have the heart with Dhamma to cleanse, to soothe, and to protect and look after one, causing one to feel affectionate warmth and peace of heart. Then, wherever one goes or stays, one is inherently content, sugato, in the manner of those who are followers of the Tathagata, without any signs of being hard up and impoverished in their hearts. This is how the Tūtanga Kammatthana bhikkhus who are intent on Dhamma go about and live, so they can stay anywhere and go anywhere, for they are prepared to put up with hardship and hunger while remaining contented and free from anxiety about anything, with Dhamma as the object of attachment, aramana, of their hearts. It may be difficult for the reader to accept some of the things that happen in connection with the forest animals that like to come and live close to bhikkhus. Therefore, to begin with, it may be better to think about the domestic animals which people like to look after with metta in their homes and in the monasteries where they go for sanctuary. In the monasteries, the number of animals, such as dogs and birds, which want to live in the monasteries increases every day until there is hardly any room left, or trees left for the birds, where they can all stay. Having thought about the domestic animals with which we are all familiar, we may go on to consider the various kinds of forest animals which tend to hang around and live about the places and monasteries where Thutanga bhikkhus stay. The writer has already written much about these animals in Venerable Ajaan Mun's biography, and elsewhere in this present book also, where many incidents are related of animals coming to live near the bhikkhus all the time, and they all know by their own experience that these stories are true. This is something we should think about from the viewpoint of Dhamma, for it is the principle of nature of giving peace, and it is a Dhamma that is inherently suited to all beings of all kinds in this world. Nor is it necessary that any of these animals should understand what this Dhamma is, but that which manifests in their experience makes all beings glad and happy to accept it everywhere throughout the world, and none of them are ever averse to it. This thing is the natural Dhamma, which manifests as calm and happiness, as peace, as trust and confidence, as goodwill, as metta, as affection and compassion, and as tolerance in which others are free to come or go as they will, without fear or danger. These are some of the things which flow from this Dhamma, and animals of all kinds like it and readily accept it, without any need to go to any school to be taught about it, because the citta and the outflow of Dhamma are a pair which should be together, far more than the possession of any external titles, rank, or authority, which are like ornaments added to oneself, that can dissolve and disappear depending on circumstances which are fickle and uncertain. Therefore, even though the animals have never known what Dhamma is, they will generally search on their own for those things which they naturally like and tend to accept readily, like the way in which stray dogs go and stay in a monastery, and forest animals go and live by Thutanga bhikkhus, because the animals understand that Dhamma, which means peace and security, is to be found in that place, so they search for it in their own way. Even those people who have never had any interest in Dhamma know those places which are secure and safe, and they like to go wandering, having fun, and playing in such places. This has been the case right through from ancient times to the present, because it would not be safe to act like this in other places. This explanation should be enough for us to understand how Dhamma and the place where people live and practice Dhamma is the place where animals and people everywhere feel confidence and freedom from danger. So they tend to relax and dispense with their usual caution, and there are some who go so far as to forget themselves completely, without thinking how other people feel about it, and whether their behavior is appropriate to bhikkhus who are the treasure of their country. For those who practice Dhamma generally know what is good and what is evil. They know good people and bad people, good animals and bad, in the same way as people do everywhere. So people should think of others, and how they also cherish their treasure, and they should not let go of all restraint everywhere. For there are always limits and bounds within which people and animals should remain, each in its own situation, and they should not mix up their relative modes of behavior until one cannot tell who is who, because they are all behaving in the same way. Venerable Ajaan Khao liked wandering about, searching for secluded places, and he frequently moved from place to place. Normally, he liked to wander in the manner of Thutanga practice, in the forests and hills where he was staying, and he also liked to change the place where he did his practice very frequently. Thus, for example, he would go to stay in a certain place as his base, but in the morning he would go off somewhere else to do his practice. Then, in the afternoon or evening, he would go to another place, and at night he would wander off to yet another place, all in the vicinity of his base. He used to change the direction he went in, sometimes going far and sometimes close by. At times he would change to another cave, moving from the cave which was his base, and he would go up to the top of the hill or to a rocky outcrop, returning to his base dwelling late at night. He said that the reason he acted like this was because when he was in confusion and disturbed while curing his defilements, kilesas, he found that by changing his situation in various ways, such as this, wisdom would arise all the time. then none of the defilements were able to get a grip on him, because they were up against the skillful ways of mindfulness and wisdom, which beat them into a corner, trapping them in various ways, so that they were forced out and got rid of time after time. If he had stayed in just one place, he would have got used to that place and settled down there. But the kilesas would not become used to it nor settle down, and they would keep increasing regardless of whether he was used to anything or not. So he had to change about and alter his methods and his environment very frequently in order to keep up with the deceptive tricks of the kilesas, which plant themselves and develop and increase and fight against oneself incessantly without ever taking time off for a rest. If there is any respite from them, it is only in deep, dreamless sleep. Otherwise, they are working all the time. Because of this, in striving to develop oneself, if one relaxes, weakens one's efforts, and puts off doing the practice, letting time slip by, it encourages the kilesas which laugh and gain heart. By changing one's place and methods of practice very frequently, one can see one's losses and gains against the kilesas, which gives them no chance to feel satisfied that they are the sole master in charge. His reasoning was most intriguing, and what he said was an excellent example for those who do not let the kilesas rise up and walk all over them, due to an easygoing overconfidence ruining every move that the chitta makes. Venerable Ajaan Khao liked to wander in the districts of Pusing, Puwua, Pulanka, Dong Motong, in the districts of Ampea Seka and Ampea Pon Pisai in Nong Khai province, as well as Ampea Ban Pang in Nakhon Phanom province. In these places there are plenty of hills, such as Pusing, Puwua, and Pulanka, which are all good places and most suitable for the practice and development of Dhamma. But they are far away from villages, too far to go Paṭipadā, so it is necessary to have some people who take turns to bring food. All these places were full of wild animals of all sorts, including tigers, elephants, wild oxen, and red oxen, amongst many others. In the afternoon and evening one could hear their calls and roars echoing throughout the forest. Anyone who had not truly overcome death would find it difficult to stay there, because there were many tigers in those places, far more than in other parts of the forest, and they were not afraid of people. Some nights, while walking Jangama and developing his practice, one of the tigers would creep up and crouch down to watch Venerable Ajaan walking, without any fear of him at all. But it never did anything to him, and it may have just wondered what he was up to, so it crept close to sniff and have a look. As soon as Venerable Ajaan Khao heard an unusual sound that he could not place, he shone his flashlight there, to see a great tiger leap away, sometimes right close in front of him. Even after that, he was able to go on walking Jangama and doing his practice, without any fear or thoughts that the tiger would come back and jump on him, maul him, and eat him, because his faith in Dhamma was stronger than fear of the tiger, so he was able to persist and keep on doing his practice. Sometimes he would climb up the hillside in the evening, from where he could see large herds of elephants, which were going for a walk along a large area of rocky outcrop which stretched for miles. As it was not covered by forest, he could see the elephants quite clearly, both large and small, going out to search for food. He said that while watching this herd of elephants, who were having fun teasing each other and playing together, he went on happily looking at them, quite absorbed until the late evening, and it got too dark to see, for they liked to tease each other and play together in the same way as people do. Venerable Ajaan Khao had a streak of very strong determination in his character, which may be seen from what we have written about him already. He had no difficulty in sitting in meditation practice all night, and there was nothing that prevented him from doing so. For sitting in meditation practice from dusk to dawn is no small thing, and unless one is the kind of person who has a heart full of courageous determination, so firm that it seems as if it could cut through a diamond, one cannot do it. So we should give him our heartfelt praise and admiration. It was in ways such as this that he was fully capable of being a teacher, an acharya to his followers, enabling them to gain peace ever since he started teaching up to the day of his death. He had absolute certainty in himself that he had reached the end of becoming and birth, and this was completely self-evident to him, even though he was still wearing the 5 khanthas. When it reached the time for him to let go of the khanthas, he went to the state of ultimate happiness, paramang sukhang, in all respects, and he became totally free of all responsibilities and concerns. This brief biography of one of the most important and outstanding of Venerable Ajaan Mun's followers is now completed. He went beyond all forms of worldly concerns entirely, and is endowed with nothing but pure Dhamma, and I have no doubts about him that he was anything other than what was portrayed here. May good fortune and blessings come to all of you who read this short biography of this most wonderful man, for as long as you do not fall back or give up your striving in the practice which leads to Dhamma, one day you will also praise the pure treasure of Dhamma, the refuge of your heart, even as this Acharya did in his own heart. This is bound to be the case, which is in conformity with the Dhamma as being the treasure of everybody who practices it in the right way. Zami Jigamma.